I don't think Francis needs any introduction to you. You know his books. You know that what he talks about is always bland, uncontroversial, and will not raise any questions at all. So when he has sorted himself out, I will hand you over.
I want you all to bawl very loudly if I'm speaking too loudly or too quietly to this very frightening machine. I'm possibly the only person in the world who has bought a microwave oven under the impression it was a flat-screen television, so anything electronic is very alarming. I was once told that when speaking in public, one should never explain, never apologise. That's the first rule. I'll immediately break it. It was at an extremely late stage, due to unfortunate efficiency of the GPO, that I was asked to do this, so it exists only in note form before it's printed, if it ever is printed. I mean, having heard it, if Adam wants to print it, it'll have to have the ers and the arms and the grumbles and the general things. I'm afraid also I'm going to have to put on these extremely sinister spectacles. My arms are too short otherwise. And wearing these, I resemble, as a friend of mine who's a historian at Sheffield remarked, I resemble a rather dubious member of the German medical profession who's been avoiding the Israeli Secret Service for some considerable length of time. Homoeopathy and the Golden Dawn. Improbable subject. Why not? You may ask. Acupuncture and the Golden Dawn, or chiropody and the Golden Dawn. Or even, I can't say the next one, I always get muddled between pediatrics and paedophilia. But anyway, it's led to some very confusing things in my time. Homoeopathy, very much in the news now, as alternative medicine is generally. 30 years ago, very few people had heard of it, except devoted homeopaths and, of course, the royal family, with George VI naming one of his racehorses Hypericum, a great homeopathic remedy. This has gone on, the association, and indeed, it is curiously enough, due to this association between homeopathy and the Golden Dawn, not homeopathy and the Golden Dawn, homeopathy and the royal family, that the present Queen almost met a notable country and western singer. I shall explain this, and I've got to be very careful, because I'm a person who's totally liable to spoonerisms of the most alarming sort. For the benefit of the one Frenchman, this is contre-petit, so when you say, population norme de cap, you say copulation norme de... etc. And I gather Spooner never made spoonerisms, in fact, but I certainly once did when I was 13 and very angelic, and was asked to introduce a choir singing the beautiful 15th century carol, The Boar's Head. So I've got to be very careful about the name of this folk singer. It is Hank Wangford. I've got it. And Hank Wangford, who you may have seen on television, singing deeply sincere songs about old dogs and truck drivers whose wives have left them and people in bar rooms in Memphis, has a dual life. In fact, a friend of mine had the alarming experience of attending a family planning clinic and suddenly realizing it was Hank Wangford who was peering at an intimate portion of her anatomy. Found it very frightening indeed. Anyway, he's a man with a great capacity, which he shares with Yasser Arafat, never to be clean-shaven, but never to grow a beard. And he also carefully has a couple of teeth blacked out, and he is also a homeopathic physician, and when not being Hank Wangford. And at one time, he was assistant to Marjorie Blackie, the Queen's homeopathic physician, and the Queen suddenly called, and Marjorie Blackie very sensibly hid him in a cupboard till Her Majesty had gone. But apart from royalty, way back to Queen Adelaide, a great many occultists have been interested in homeopathy from its very introduction into England. In fact, unorthodox medicine and occultism have gone together for at least 2 centuries. I say deliberately unorthodox medicine, not quack medicine, because I am quite sure that one would in 1850 have been a great deal safer in the hands of some astrological herbalist than one would have in the hands of the orthodox medical profession with its armory of bloodletting, immense purges, cuppings, leechings, and generally treatment was admirably successful except the patient died. I still have I might as well say on the subject of homoeopathy, it seems to be theoretically nonsense, but it actually works, which is not always true of orthodox medicine. I think it was Evelyn Waugh who remarked of Randolph Churchill having a growth removed that it wasn't malignant. He said it was typical of the medical profession to remove the only part of Randolph Churchill that wasn't malignant. Anyway, let me move on a little from here. In the letters of the Reverend W.A. Ayton, edited by Ellick Howe, we come across, along with many other curious propositions, such as that Gladstone was an agent of the Jesuits, a letter to his friend Gardner on the subject of Count Mattei. When here you mentioned Mattei's medicine, since then Brother Wilson put some evidence before me that made me think it possible that when I tried them some years ago, I was furnished with spurious medicines. So I tried them again and corresponded directly with the Count. Not only did his medicines do me no good, but they did positive harm. Upon mentioning this, I had a note just changing one of the medicines, equally useless. There was something in the letter which seemed to convey to me the impression, I make money by the credulity of mankind, and I suppose you to be one of them. My impression of this is confirmed, and then he goes on about a carbuncle and how he cured it with a balm of sulphur he'd manufactured, etc. Now, this is rather typical of early members of the Golden Dawn. They were interested in unorthodox medicine. And Gardner's query about Count Mattei was almost certainly raised by the fact there had been an article in 1890 in the National Review on the subject of Count Mattei's electro-homeopathy. He sold medicines called green, blue, yellow, and red electricity. Sounds a bit improbable, but there we are. And they are very amusingly described by a lady, Arthur Macken, keeps recurring, was in love with at one time, Mrs. C.F. Lale, founder of the Culpeper Society, who had previously been an actress. And she remarks, Count Mattei of Bologna became famous with his coloured electric fluids. Pope Pius IX placed part of the Hospital of St. Teresa in Rome at his disposal, and he is said to have achieved amazing cures. Shepherd's purse was the principal herb in the blue electric fluid. It had 7 others, cabbage, feverfew, watercress, etc., etc., etc. The point is that Mattei called himself an electro-homeopath, and there is something about homeopathy that has appealed to, curious enough, apart from royalty, 2 very distinct groups of people. One, oddly enough, are evangelical Christians. The other are occultists. And as it may seem a somewhat surprising statement, I think it is perhaps worth remembering that Dr. Felkin of the Stella Matutina started life as a medical missionary, was one of the first Europeans in Uganda. It came very near being eaten, as a matter of fact, quite literally, and always displayed an interest in homeopathy. And he subsequently became an occultist. Now, I presume we all know, or guess we know, what homeopathy is, i.e. the phrase Brian Inglis referred to as one of his books as the magic of the minimum dose. Now, of course, homeopathic medicines are extremely attenuated, but the basic principle of homeopathy is not the minimum dose. It is like cures like. An upset stomach, well, arsenic, which, as Rudolf Steiner once said is a great astrologer, the fact known to Victorians. But of course, if one started using things like arsenic and etc., one has to give it in pretty minimum doses, or one soon finds that one is in trouble unless one's on a very large commission from the local undertaker. So they have to be. But at a very early stage in the development of homeopathy in the early 19th century, it was pointed out that in the higher potencies, i.e. dilutions, there was actually none of the original substance left. And you can, in fact, prove this by a mathematical formula about the molecular thing. And homeopathic medicines of 60x and above contain no trace whatsoever of the original substance, which doesn't mean they don't work if you either follow a purely empirical thing or an argument that was put forward by some occultists, among them Dr. Felkin. Now, Hahnemann, who lived from 1755 to 1843, was extremely conscious of the fact that there was a spirit-like quality, as he called it, in homeopathic medicines, i.e. that there was nothing left. He wrote, "The inner, spirit-like medicinal powers of crude substances to an unheard of degree and make all of them exceedingly immeasurably penetrating, active, and effective. Even those that in the raw state do not have the slightest effect. There is a natural law by which forces capable of altering the health of living organisms are generated in the raw material of the remedies through use of trituration, that means grinding, and succussion, shaking. This remarkable transformation of the properties of natural substances develops latent dynamic powers previously imperceptible and, as it were, lying hidden and asleep. Trituration and succussion unlock the natural substances. The dilutant is only an auxiliary, although an indispensable factor. The medicinal substance that seems to us only crude matter is completely transformed and refined by progressive dynamizations to become a spirit-like medicinal source. It is highly probable that during such dynamization, the material substance eventually dissolves completely into its spirit-like essence." And this, I think, is the reason that homeopathy tended to attract occultists, and why one of the earliest members of the Golden Dawn was a homeopathic physician, Dr. Berridge, why Westcott, a very orthodox physician in some ways, was intrigued by homeopathy, and why Felkin certainly experimented with homeopathic medicines, and whose later connection with Rudolf Steiner may have been at least partly, as I shall hope to show, caused by his interest in homeopathy. Now, it is generally assumed that Felkin, as you all undoubtedly know, went to Germany solely in search of Rosicrucians. It was there that, seeking the mysterious Anna Sprengel, he came into contact with someone who led him to Steiner. But there are certain curious suggestions, which I think, if not approving, or at least suggestive, that Felkin did in fact absorb himself in anthroposophical medicine, which is very largely a derivation of homeopathic medicine plus some elements derived from Steiner. At this point, I have to pick up some of the papers I've dropped with typical efficiency. Because the great thing about bumbling is it gives one an excuse to think of what to say next, you see. Now, anthroposophical medicine, which contains very large elements of homeopathy in it, and for those who want to go further in this, I suggest reading a very important paper by Francis Treuherz in the Journal of the American Institute of Homeopathy, and on a much more pop level, a book of my own called Rudolf Steiner, Holistic Medicine, which came out last year. Anthroposophical medicine is generally stated in all histories of anthroposophy to have originated in 1920, when Rudolf Steiner gave his first lecture to a group of physicians. I strongly suspected this was not so, in view of, firstly, an entry in the diary of all people, Franz Kafka, who wrote in 1912, after making a remarkable statement that Steiner lived on a diet of 3 litres of emulsified nuts a day, which may or may not be true, who am I to say? Franz Kafka, in his diary, noted that a lady he knew, the lady's doctor, when the first signs of influenza appeared in her, asked Dr. Steiner for a remedy. He cured her immediately. At Munich, a doctor cures people with colours decided upon by Dr. Steiner. He also sends invalids to an art gallery with instructions to look at a painting for an hour. A bit remarkable, that. Etc. Now, where are we? I'm sorry, bumbling again. Now, this diary entry dates from 1911, and unsupported, it might mean not much more than, Kafka was a bit rude about Steiner. What shall I do, he asked Steiner, to improve my memory? Stop eating eggs, Steiner replied rudely. But a very significant quotation occurs in Wynne Westcott's Data Towards the History of the Rosicrucians, 1916. The revived Rosicrucian lodges on the continent of Europe are carried on with great privacy, and their members do not openly confess to their admission and membership. Several centres are in active work under conditions derived from previous centuries of usefulness. Many groups of the continental Rosicrucians are not necessarily Freemasons. Now here's the significant bit. As in the earliest times, the Rosicrucians not only studied but went about doing good and healing the diseased, so now the present-day Rosicrucians are concerned in the study and administration of medicines in a manufacture upon old lines. They also teach and practice the curative effects of coloured light and cultivate mental processes which are believed to induce spiritual enlightenment and extended powers of the human senses. Now, I do not think this can apply to anything else but the richly working group under Steiner at that time. Westcott's information must have dated before 1914, or all communication, even through Switzerland, had ceased by 1916 when data was published. So I came to the conclusion that some form of anthroposophical medicine was in existence before 1920, well before the First World War, in fact, and that Felkin and, to some extent, Westcott were caught up with it. At this stage, I was contacted by Mr. Neil Franklin, who was did an MA at Swansea under an old friend of mine on Burma and Blake, and is now doing a PhD on the sources of anthroposophy. And Mr. Franklin is not only a scholar, but also an occultist. Not as common a combination as one might hope for, but there it is. And he is a member of the Anthroposophical Society and also a member of the First Class, which, for those of you who aren't anthroposophists, is roughly the anthroposophical equivalent of the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society. He drew my attention to the fact that Steiner's first contacts in this country were not with, as generally thought, the people who were in the Stella Matutina, Harry Collison and Sandrio, along with Meakin and Felkin. They were, in fact, a doctor, Hayward Smith. It was with Hayward Smith that that Steiner stayed when he was in London in 1913. Hayward Smith was a homeopath. Hayward Smith seems to have had contacts with Felkin. Hayward Smith was running a Rosicrucian, so-called Rosicrucian group, i.e. a Steinerite anthroposophical group in London as early as 1911. There is no doubt about that at all. Mr. Franklin has also drawn my attention to hard evidence of the existence of a clinic practicing anthroposophical medicine in Munich in as early as 1911, at the very time when Felkin was in Germany and must have derived the information which was passed to Westcott for that data. There was an anthroposophical clinic. There are descriptions surviving of it. The treatments were coloured lights, staring at reproductions of Raphael, etc., examining the Platonic solids. Felkin got more and more interested in homeopathy and in anthroposophical medicine, as well as being chief of the Stella Matutina. As though it wasn't enough putting up with Miss Stoddart with her theory that the German general staff was an agent of the learned elders of Zion, it was all a bit much. He moved to Havelock North, as you know. He started Smaragdine Thalasses, which I can never pronounce, at Havelock North, and there still, at Havelock North, are the New Zealand headquarters of Veleda, a leading anthroposophical pharmacist, which produces a great deal of homeopathic remedies, very effective they are too, which you can find in almost any chemist in this country now. So there is a continuing strain in homeopathy. In the Golden Dawn, you get Berridge at the beginning, you get Aiton fiddling about, not only with old alchemical processes, but with Count Mattei and his electrotherapy. You get in the mystical Kamala, Diane Fortune references, slightly in passing and mysterious, but which are unquestionably to homeopathic remedies. And her husband, Dr. Penrith Evans, although a medical officer of health somewhere, is known to have experimented and played about with homeopathy. So there is a bit more reason to talk about the Golden Dawn and homeopathy than there is about the Golden Dawn and chiropody. Thank you.